Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organizations. Each and every episode, we sit down with experts from various fields from around the world, just like you're grabbing a coffee with them, to dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So go grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you communicate when someone you care about, or maybe someone on your team, is walking through a tough season of life? Maybe it's grief, maybe it's suffering, maybe it's pain, maybe a loved one they have is going through something, or maybe they're just in a difficult season and you're trying to figure out, how can I communicate with them? What do I say? What do I do? Most of us, sometimes we don't know what to say. So sometimes we avoid the conversations altogether, but sometimes silence isn't neutral. It's another wound, really. And so we want to jump into that on today's Speak with People podcast. This is the podcast where we believe great leaders just don't speak, they connect, they inspire, and they lead through healthy conversations. And today I am joined by a longtime friend. I was trying to remember just when we first met, and I think it's 10 plus years, maybe. We'll dive into that. But her name is Leslie Lamb. She has a powerful passion for helping people engage in hard seasons in life with empathy, presence, authentic communication. And so if you've ever struggled for finding the right words to say, if you've ever struggled yourself through those seasons, today's the episode for you. I cannot wait to provide a roadmap and some practical steps for us all to be able to know how to communicate. Leslie, welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's go back in time. I'm trying to
Okay.
remember when we first met because I think it's been a while.
Yeah, I think actually it would have been 12 years ago
Mm.
because it was when I was still in ministry, teen ministry. I had just written some books at that time and I was heavily involved in helping the youth. And I think you were speaking at one of our conferences, and that's how I met you and connected with you.
I was trying to, okay, yeah, absolutely. I remember coming down and I think it was maybe winter or early, or late winter because I got to come down, or maybe it was fall, I can't remember.
It would
Regardless,
have
it was
been fall. It would have been November because
okay.
that's like a yearly set time that they
Okay.
would have done that. So,
That's wonderful. And I think I was so excited because already I would have been in Michigan at the time. It would have already been a little bit chillier. So it was great. It was great to be down. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. Before we jump into this conversation, maybe give our listeners just a little bit more of your story, the 30,000 foot view, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to this place of life.
I grew up overseas. So that's a lot of my story. My parents were missionaries. I grew up in boarding school. I went off to boarding school when I was 12 years old. So
Wow.
really grew up on my own independently for a really young age.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So came back to the States for college because came back to Louisiana because my grandfather had died and I realized I really didn't know the area that my parents had grown up in, wanted to experience that. Met my husband, went to college, like all of those things that we generally do. And then I went into ministry, like I mentioned before. I was helping with youth ministry, things like that. And from that, I started writing books about teenage issues and life controlling issues. And out of that, I started sitting with people and really hearing their stories and just really being heartbroken for the level of emotional and mental disruption that is happening around us. And
Mm.
I started really praying about God. Like, I'm hearing these stories and they're breaking my heart. I know they're breaking yours. Can I be a part of their healing? Can I be a part of not just writing stories, but helping people rewrite their stories? And then God was like, sure, but you have to go back to school. And so I went back to the university and I got my degree in mental health counseling. And I've been licensed for several years and I've been doing that ever since.
Wow. Wow. So it's 12 on. So before
Mhm.
12, were you just with your folks in the mission field, wherever you guys were at?
Well, yes, I would have been with them. My dad was a church planter,
Okay.
so a lot of movement. They moved every couple of years, which is, really disruptive. And did homeschooling for 2 years, which my mom was like, "Oh, I don't think this is good for her personality." I was very social and I was being more and more isolated. And so, yeah, so my mom made the hard decision to send me away for school. And it was traumatic, but, the Lord has used even that traumatic story to influence how I see the world around me.
Do you think it was helpful, especially now as an adult? I meet people who, they grew up in the same spot, uh, never left their county, maybe traveled to Orlando once, from another part of the country, or maybe their big city. So do you think it was helpful, from a teenage perspective to now as an adult? I mean, boy, you really got a global worldview. And then with the moves, you just got a, different view of what was happening around the world.
Yes, I'm grateful for that experience. I'm grateful for growing up in another culture. We were in Korea for 13 years. And
Wow.
so growing up in another culture and seeing even different religions and different ideologies, like I think that it's really helpful to me, especially in what I do. I do a lot of multicultural counseling, so I'm able to kind of get into that space of what it's like to kind of be a foreigner in America and what it feels like to be different and to know that there has been a society and a culture that's created around one understanding and
Mm,
feeling like an alien in the midst of all of that. So yeah, definitely. I wouldn't change it for the world.
wow. Boy, what a fantastic experience. I'm remembering, so in high school, I dated a young woman who was adopted from South Korea. And, just even her, sometimes had such a different look on things as, than me because, being adopted from another country, people did or said just ridiculous things at times,
Yeah.
uh, and so now, after adopting a child from China,
Mm,
we've tasted like a little bit of that. We've heard
right.
some of the, comments that are different and, some of those kind of things. So it's just always fascinating to me, especially for leaders, when sometimes we look through the same lens all the time, we forget that there are different parts of the world looking, at through different lenses.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a fantastic experience. Okay, so you worked with students and then went back, went through the degree and came out, and so now you work with people in those one-on-one. Do you do one-on-one counseling? Is it group counseling? How do you do that?
One on one.
Okay,
I have done group, but it's not my favorite. I prefer to do one on one.
absolutely, absolutely. So when it comes to kind of walking, with someone when they're going through grief, when they're going through pain, they're going through tough seasons. I run into leaders all the time in the workplace, in the corporate world, uh, who we just never know what to say. There's
Mhm.
it's like, oh, okay, my coworker is going through all this kind of stuff. Do I say something? Do I stay away? Is my absence better? you know, let's start there. Kind of walk us through, where should our mindset be when we know someone we work with is going through something difficult.
Well, I think that it's always going to be hard. It's always going to be uncomfortable.
Mm.
Loss is, grief is, suffering is. And I think that if we try to find a language to make it comfortable, we're going to fall short because there's no way to do that. And the purpose of meeting someone in their suffering is not to make them feel better. And I think that's something that
Oh,
we lose sight of at times is like you're not there to make them feel better. You're there to help them walk through what's difficult. And I think if we could get that mindset, like, you don't have to find the right words, but you also can't be silent, because we all have our own meanings of what silence is. And for the most part, it's negative.
Mm.
So my encouragement is to really engage the person, the situation. You might not have walked through what they're walking through, but you can at least acknowledge what it is to walk through something hard.
Well, wow. Well, you start off with such a profound thought, because I think sometimes, I know I have at least, many of us walk through that and we think, I mean, you talked about how the purpose of meeting someone that are suffering is not to make them feel better. I mean, like, so often we view ourselves through that lens of like, okay, I'm going to help them. I'm going to, I'm going to be the one that will give things. But so often it's just our presence and showing up, that what we need to do. And I think we struggle because it's like, I got to have the perfect words. And you just talked about, hey, we probably never will.
Right, right. And I think that when we try to have that's one thing that I've been sitting with lately, especially in the climate of our culture right now, is like we come at people with answers when really they just need space. They need a space to really process what they're thinking through. And when we jump to logicizing their experience, or, in our case, in a ministry world, theologizing their experience, jumping to the existential instead of the present, and how is this feeling right now, and what do you need right now, then very often people feel unseen,
Mm,
and realistically so,
right.
because you haven't really heard what I've said. You're just going into what you think I need, or trying to give me an answer for something that might not actually be able to be answered. And that's where it becomes difficult for us too. So we kind of get stuck in that, like, okay, well, what do I say again to make them feel better? And you can't. And so instead of doing anything, you just kind of pull back and they feel isolated.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. Or uh, maybe some can relate, but we end up saying something that, we just wish we could get the words,
Oh
as
my
they
gosh.
as they just trickle out. We're like, why did I say that?
That is where we make the mistakes, right? When we think that we have to come up with something, that's when we're going to make mistakes. That's when we're going to say something that is probably better left unsaid. And I think that, part of sitting with people, it's more important to listen than it is to speak. And I think we've lost the art of listening, which is why I love Speak with People so much. And what you're doing is because it is incorporating the idea, as leaders, we are first called to listen to what the person is saying. And communication, like you've said, is so much more than just words. It's actions, it's feeling. And when we can tune into that, we're going to lead better.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was funny. I even had a conversation last week with someone about the phrase "speak with people," and we started talking about it. And the flip side is speak with them, not at them. And part of those at qualities we talk about all the time is when we interrupt somebody, when we don't listen to somebody, when we're abrasive, when our body language communicates something else. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. It's just amazing. And for me, like when people kind of sweep it under the rug, they think, well, I've been doing this one way my whole life. Why change now? Like, ooh, okay, that's kind of where your communication is kind of gone to die. So you
Hmm.
need to look for those moments and opportunities, especially now. What do you think has started to, and maybe it's been like this, and you can dive into that as well. But you talked about you know, especially now when maybe we're a little bit more. I mean, every day it seems like we see another horrific something on the news. Our social media feeds are just filled with people yelling at each other, or, in my case, puppies or dogs that need adopting. But what's caused this, this influx of just not wanting to communicate with each other, not wanting to listen to each other, not wanting to hear, what's going on?
Well, I think there's such a cacophony of sound that it becomes almost overstimulating.
Hmm.
And then you have also this demand of say something, right? And I think that because we live in a culture and a time where we do have immediate access to send out a message, we do have the ability to put forth our feelings and our thoughts instantaneously. But just because we have the ability and the means does not mean that we have to.
Hmm.
And as leaders, we are even more responsible because there are people that we are influencing with our words. And I think that we've lost sight of that, or we choose not to see that in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, obviously, I have a podcast. And so I did have some people like, hey, you haven't mentioned some of these things. Like, where do you stand with this? And my response was a private response. And it was just like, look, it's not that I don't care about these things, that it's not that these things don't bother me, but it's finding and crafting the words that are helpful are
Yeah.
more important to me than just letting out my emotions.
Mm.
And another thing that, even in this space of with mental health and leadership is a lot of times we don't realize as leaders that we are another authoritarian figure in their life, right? So whether they mean to do it or not, there is this subconscious connect of my leader and my parent, right? There is some kind of role that sometimes overlaps. And so if you had a relationship with a parent that was aggressive or forceful or manipulative, a lot of times you can look for those things in your leader. And that's why, even like, when it's moments of grief and suffering, like we're talking about, that's why when a leader feels silent, it feels painful. Because if you think about Jason, when you were a kid, I don't know if your parents did this, but sometimes when parents are upset with us, they'll shut us off, right? And so silence is interpreted as punishment or a lack of regard or care. So we already have a meaning for silence that might not be accurate, but we know it intrinsically. And then we project our meaning of silence into the situation.
Wow.
And we have to be careful with that,
Yeah.
especially as leaders. There's a different level of standard and expectation that visits us in that place.
Wow. Uh, as you're speaking, as you're saying, you're laying this out, uh, you know, was thinking through a time where I wounded someone with my silence. Their communication over the course of a few months had just become more and more harmful to me. And, I did my best to communicate back, like, hey, trying to set up some boundaries, trying to protect. And I think I just got to a place where I was like, okay, I'm saying the same thing over and over. I can't take this anymore. And so I just went silent. And I mean, I've had people go silent on me. It is the wound above all wounds sometimes. I mean, I take someone just coming out and, screaming at me instead of that silent wound. I mean, it's so powerful. So powerful, especially too with the people we work with,
Hmm.
when they won't open up, they won't talk to us, they won't, and then everybody can feel it in the office. Why is that? How come when someone's being so quiet, they're actually being so loud?
Well, yeah, because I think it is that, whether we fully realize it or not, a work environment can very much feel like a surrogate family.
Mm.
We see that a lot, I mean, we jokingly talk about my work husband or my work wife and things
Yep.
like that, because there is almost this sense of community that happens in that workspace, and very often family dynamics enter in to there, and so when one person is hurting, the community feels it. When one person is offended, the community feels it, because it's a dynamic that reaches beyond just that one person.
Wow.
And that's why, considering those things, being compassionate about that. But I understand it's difficult because you're talking about a professional environment,
Sure.
but there are some personal aspects to that professional environment. And
Right.
I think yeah, go
Right.
ahead.
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I mean, it was so great, but I mean, often the old, office TV show, Michael Scott used to joke about it being a family, or, some, like you just talked about, we kind of view it as a family at times. And so we bring some of those, dynamics in. What are a couple of, you know, incredibly practical steps or ways that if we notice someone who has gone silent, not just on us, but, everyone, what are some ways that we can approach that, try to reestablish communication? I imagine, we could just walk over and say, "Hey, what's your deal?" But sometimes we don't do that. Walk us through maybe a couple of the healthy steps we can take.
Well, and I even think the word, the language of that, "what's your deal," and I'm not saying that you would say that, but maybe somebody would, is
Sure.
automatically going to bring a defense, right?
Right.
Because that's going to be interpreted as, "what's your problem?"
Yep.
And so we want to create a conversation. We want to create a language that is inviting and not off-putting, right? And
Mm,
so really just finding a time to reach out and to be like, "Hey, I noticed," right? Again, observation, not, "Hey, you're acting weird," but, "I've noticed that you've been spending more time in your office," or, "I've noticed that in community settings you're less engaged. Can you tell me about that?" Like, again, it's about curiosity. I Give me information versus let me tell you what's happening.
wow.
And I think if we could get more in a practice of being curious rather than feeling like, I have to have all the answers, I think we would get a lot further in all of our relationships, actually.
Wow. That's powerful. I feel, Leslie, as we continue on this conversation, you keep taking us to a different depth here. As you were talking about that, I was just remembering a time where someone pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you're typically jovial, filled with energy in these meetings. You've just disappeared." And this was my last employer, and I went quiet because I was tired of either being made fun of or some type of sharp, sarcastic comment from the person in charge, or thrown under the bus, or whatever the reason was. But
Mhm.
it's amazing, especially in unhealthy cultures. Uh, you know, Sometimes we don't even realize there are so many different things at play to maybe someone's silence, and what's going on with them.
Yeah. And, in recognizing, I think one thing that I see that is super, super sad, because majority of the people that I counsel are Christians. And I see, honestly, non-Christians, non-followers of Jesus, let me be more specific, do this better.
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart because I think that we're missing something. We're truly missing something, and we're not seeing people very clearly in a space where we should be seeing people the most clearly.
Wow.
But I would ask you, in that moment when they said that to you, I mean, it doesn't sound like maybe it was a very safe setting, but what did you feel when they said, "Hey, I noticed that you've been being pretty quiet." Like, what was your immediate response to that? What did you feel?
Oh, well, at that point with that work setting, I was sort of in like a shell shock, tense, waiting for the next one. So when they brought that up, I was like, "Oh no, are other people noticing this? Am I going to get
Mhm.
made fun of from the front because of this?" Where other
Yeah.
people in the room, it had happened the same thing. Anytime anybody spoke. I mean, we had so many incredible guests in this podcast talk about healthy culture and healthy, team and all that. And, some of us who have been through maybe the unhealthy side of it, or myself, I've led teams where I've documented it a ton on the Speak with People blog and other places where I haven't led in a healthy way. It's so easy to get wounded. And then you bring up such a painful yet powerful point. I don't know what Christian pastor said at first, but oftentimes we as Christians, we're the best at shooting each other in the back.
Mm,
It's just something. I wonder why. Like
yeah.
we have the answers, but why do we do this?
I really don't know, but that's why I feel like, I'm really involved in majority of the people that I help are in leadership in the church and helping them to get healthy so that they can lead well. Because that's another thing that we find is how we lead ourselves then becomes projected in how we lead others. So like for
Wow.
instance, if we talk back about suffering, and grief, like how do you lead yourself when you're in a space of grief and suffering? Because if you're just pushing through, then guess what you're going to project those people underneath you to do? Push through, right?
Right.
Well, you took 3 days off to go to the funeral, but you're back at work, so get back to work.
Right.
Well, probably because you talk to yourself like that. But
Right.
that's not going to get you very far with the people that you're trying to lead.
Right. Wow. Ooh, yeah. And it's got to be such an interesting time as sociologists and historians document, everything. It's nonstop, uh, every single day with incredibly awful social media story. And then you think it can't get any worse. And then there's another incredibly awful. And then you have this person screaming at this person. And then you have, it's amazing. I would maybe I might be going on a limb, so you can tell me I'm wrong or not. Maybe I'd put us a little in the same category with our social media posting. I tend not to, jump in the
Mud.
waters. Yeah, I mean, I try. My posting seems. I try to run it through a lens of, okay, if this is going to cause a great stir in the comment section, will anything be accomplished, in
Hmm.
the comment section online? So,
Right.
is it worth it, to even post about it? Maybe it is. I have friends who post on either side of every issue, and I watch the comments go. I mean, just recently, there's this woman out there, Julie Royce. She's a Christian investigative journalist or something, and I emailed her and I said, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast because I want to ask you about, do you think some of the stories that you produce, you go to YouTube and you look at the comments and it's like, oh my goodness, it's like the worst of
Hmm.
humanity. And
Hmm.
to your point earlier, a lot of them are Christ followers or say they were. And
Hmm.
she was like, yeah, we've noticed that. I don't have time to be on your podcast. I was like, no worries. But I'm just so curious, I opened up a lot there for you, but
Yeah.
maybe, start with if we find ourselves, getting worked up by everything that we're saying, what should we do? B, if someone close to us is, stirring all of that kind of stuff, how do we have some of that, kind of conversation and movement?
Well, I think, there's a reason why we're called users of social media, because they
Wow.
are feeding us, right? Like this is an algorithm that is created to bring people in. And what brings people in more than an argument, unfortunately?
Yep.
And so, I mean, sure, there's some level, I don't know that person that you're talking about, but there's some level that's like, maybe I don't like that. But also, I do like the hits I'm getting.
Oh, for
I
sure.
do like that I am, going up in the stratosphere of social media because of all of these comments. And at some point, it becomes a conversation of people and profit. And that is what's sad to me is that
Yeah.
very often we will create havoc and storm for people when we really aren't thinking about them at all.
Mm.
We're not thinking about people. Like, just for instance, I was writing an episode that I'm about to do called The Slow Burn of Infidelity. And like, when all of that was happening, and I'm going to go back because there's certain things I don't want to talk about that's happening in this moment. But when all of that came out and the affair was caught on the jumbotron at the Coldplay
Yeah.
concert, right? So I saw so much that was being said in that. And as someone who struggled with infidelity in my life and who got out of that and repented, and my life looks radically different, some of the things that my friends were saying about this couple, this woman, this man, sure, they're talking about people they don't know, but
Yeah.
they know me. And they might not know the fullness of my story, but suddenly some of the things that they were saying, it didn't feel like, oh, that's about them. It felt like, oh, that's about me. Like, this is how you truly feel about people who think this way or who get caught in these scenarios. Like, you really think they're evil? You really think that they deserve what's coming to them? You really think
Right.
that?
Right.
And so I think, I don't even know if I'm answering your question at this point, but I think that because we have that sense of, I'm going to say what needs to be said and I want everybody to hear my opinion, that very often we're not thinking about the people that are sitting beside us that might have felt safe, but now they don't.
Yep. Yep. Well, like just what you just said, I mean, some people kind of live under the motto of, well, I need to speak my truth, and I
Hmm.
got to speak everything that I think. And I think sometimes even when we do have someone who's hurting, grieving, struggling, they're in a silent season, this person maybe doesn't have the emotional intelligence to go, okay, wait a minute. Not everything that I'm feeling needs to be said. Uh,
Right.
but it's almost like it's kind of where we're at as a society.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I don't know where we're going to see that turn around.
I don't either. I mean, it is, so unbelievably wild to think how well the algorithms know us.
Hmm.
And, I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know who said it recently. Social media is a cancer, but
Hmm.
it's just amazing, what can happen. Because
Yeah.
yeah, you're so right. Well, we see something and then we're so immediate to throw all of our thoughts and opinions, but we don't know the people, we don't know the situation, we don't know what's happening. And so maybe for some of us who are kind of going, okay, I want to be that leader who thinks before I speak, where I can
Yes.
create a kind of a safe place for people. If they just want to talk, I'll listen to them. Maybe walk us through maybe some steps we can take to be that type of leader.
Well, I think what do you need is a great question to ask, right? And now that can be negotiable. Like, I'm not saying what do you need and then give them what they need, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a good question to ask when people are struggling, or when you notice that they're disconnected. Like, what do you need? And then how can I create space, right? Sometimes
Yes.
space looks like, I am the assistant counseling director in this space. So I am over three other counselors in our space. And recently, we have a new mother and she's struggling with nursing. And some people might think that shouldn't be a big deal, but it is a big deal. And so we ask her, like, how can we hold space for you? Like, what does that look like in this struggle for you? And she's just like, I just need to, if my door is closed, I just need you to respect that. Or, she said, I'm probably going to be in my office more. Okay, we can do that. Now if that presses on for weeks, well, we might have to revisit that conversation. But in the moment, what she needed was that. And I
Mm.
did notice that towards the end of the week, her door was being left open more, right? So even just knowing, hey, I actually can take space to myself, was safe for her
Mm.
to really feel her feelings and be like, I'm not able to be with my child right now. I'm struggling with nursing. This is affecting me. And we could all say, we see you, we love you, and we'll create space for you.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. You know, that's so good. I was just going back as you were talking about the couple from the Coldplay concert, and I was thinking about, okay, what was, the next week like at work?
Oh,
you know, was there anyone who, you know, was, that wasn't quick to throw the first stone, that that empathized, that, and I've read more of the story, since then. And,
mm-hmm.
there's a whole lot more to the story than just, okay, this couple,
And
if
there
they,
generally is.
oh, right.
In all of these things, it's like the reality is if you are too quick to speak, you're going to look like an idiot
Yeah.
because there's just too much that you don't know. And that's why I think, that's when fools rush in, right? But wisdom waits,
Yep.
and wisdom measures its words. And as leaders, we have got to be wise leaders.
Wow.
And that is, that's
Wow.
my heart all the time. Like, Lord, how do I lead with wisdom?
Wow. Yeah. How do I lead with wisdom? Wow. Yeah. Let's go back for a second and touch on there's always more to the story. I mean, there's
Mm,
layers to every story.
every story.
And yeah, how do we remember that, in the situation? How do we navigate that? Because, there's just not, it's just not the one layer that we were told by somebody else who gave us their version of the story. There's so
Hmm.
much more to it.
Yeah. And I think that one of the ways that we do that is just to be mindful of compassion.
Mm.
We talk a lot about empathy, and empathy is putting myself in your shoes, which is actually a little bit more of a selfish stance. Whereas compassion, the literal Greek word means to suffer with,
Mm.
right? So empathy is about, I can put myself in your shoes. But compassion is, even if I can't, I can put my shoes on and walk with you.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that we need to be a more compassionate society. And I think that would say it would change a lot of our dynamics because I might not understand what you're going through, but I can walk with you through it. And most people need to know that, right? There's been so many hurts in our lives. And there's so many parental ruptures that as leaders, we're responsible to lead and parent sometimes. And that's where it gets difficult. It's like, well, I'm not their parent. No, you're not their parent, like in a family sense, but in the sense of walking with them and helping them to feel seen and to feel safe and acknowledged,
Yeah.
whereas maybe they haven't ever felt that way.
Right. Right. Well, I'm just continually struck as we're having this conversation. And I've talked about this before, think about it a ton, but, every opportunity you have to lead people, whether it's you volunteer for a church or, wherever you're at in your, leading people, whether it's at work and you actually have staff members or maybe you lead interns, whatever it is. I mean, you talk about the magnitude of an important opportunity because, people will remember. They'll remember how you led. They'll remember what you allowed to happen under your leadership. If you're in a team meeting and the leader allows somebody else to make fun of or, constantly call out, 30 years from now, your
Hmm.
name will come up. Yeah, I had this boss once. Ken always let everybody attack everybody. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the responsibility that we have. And I don't think I felt that in my 20s or 30s.
Hmm.
definitely do
Yeah.
definitely do now.
Yeah. Well, that's so, I mean, that brings up so many things, but it's just the fact that that's leadership is very disconcerting. Like
Sure.
that we can make fun of people. Like, I used to help at a youth camp, and one of the reasons why I stopped was because I just really could not hear adults making fun of kids, making fun of themselves, teenagers making fun of other. It really got to be a really toxic environment. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't have to entertain this. And I don't have to be in leadership in a space where this is their idea of leadership. I don't even know where that comes from. And maybe I'm naive, but if you wouldn't say it to, yourself, or if you wouldn't say it to someone that you love, why would you say it to someone you barely know?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And think there's a huge difference because you know going back to earlier, we were talking about I can't remember what we were talking about, but what spurred on this idea was how we disagree.
Mhm.
Today, like
Right.
if I think differently than you, well, I'm gonna unfollow you. I'm gonna not listen to your opinion.
Mhm.
I love to debate. I love to sit and talk through, but in my debate, like I ask lots of questions. Typically I think people who know me would describe me as, fun and jovial, and Jason will get the room laughing. But, when I'm passionate about something and the debate's going, my mind is going a million miles an hour. I'm asking questions. There's such a difference there than, the attacks that we've all felt, and when those are allowed, that's when it's painful. And just like we talked about at the beginning, it's a shame that we experience those in, church settings. We experience those in the workplace. And so, leaders have to be diligent to snuff those out and make sure, they communicate in ways that continually model to everyone, hey, we're going to choose to communicate in healthy ways.
Yeah. And I think part of that is, we have so many experiences with rupture. We don't
Mm.
have a lot of experience with repair. And rupture
Right.
without repair is painful, and it will isolate and remove and disconnect. Whereas rupture with repair builds a bridge of resilience in the relationship.
Wow.
So I think that that's part of the problem is like we haven't taught this generation, like, and maybe because we didn't know ourselves and we couldn't model it, what it looks like to be very upset about something that someone has said, but also learning how to create a bridge back into the relationship when we've been offended or when our feelings have been hurt or things like that.
Yeah.
And, it's difficult. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. But I think a lot of times our brain will interpret it as unsafe, which really what's unsafe is being able to rupture and run off, but it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas it is safer to be able to rupture and repair, but it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah. Whew. Wow. Yeah. Boy, that's incredibly powerful. Whew. Oh, goodness. So walk us through as we kind of start turning the conversation. We've gone through a bunch of different layers here. When we, our emotions, our presence, our compassion, our empathy kind of all work together, and we're, you know, trying to connect in an authentic way with the coworker or the friend or the family member who's going through a tough season. Walk us through, are there some uh, uh, phrases to stay away from? Are there some, unhealthy habits to stay away from in those seasons? When we recognize that.
Whew. I mean, there's a lot of things that we probably should stay away from. Um, but I think, I go back to that just like sitting with them and asking them, what do you
Yeah.
need?
Yeah.
What do you need? Right? Instead of assuming what they need, a pep talk, encouragement, an attaboy, get back out there. What do you need? And then how can we do that? Right? How can we make space for that?
Yeah.
And again, knowing it's a negotiable, right? I'm not asking you what you need and then I'm feeling compelled to do that for you, but also realizing like I can recognize your need while also offering something else if that is not possible.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a cubicle, it's not possible to shut your door and to have that space to yourself. But what else can you do?
Right.
And I think that if we as leaders would look at the people that we lead as less a commodity and more of a essential part of community, I think we would make allowances that would actually bring a greater sense of loyalty to the business that they're a part of than what we think we need to do. I mean, like I've just seen it so many times. Like, for instance, we had a new counselor and it was difficult for her. And so, for the first few weeks of her employment, I told her, I said, you know what? Why don't you just extend your lunch time? Just extend it another 15 minutes. It's not hurting us. It's not hurting her, right? It's helping her. And you know what she didn't do? She didn't take advantage of that and push that to 30 minutes. She took those 15 minutes and there was a time where she could have left our organization because our life was moving in a different direction. But because she always felt seen, because she always felt acknowledged,
Yep.
when that
Yep.
decision came, she stayed with us
Yep.
because the loyalty was there, because the safety was there, because we prioritized her and her needs versus what we needed to get done. And we didn't lose anything. In fact, we got a better employee in the long run.
Well,
So,
it was so powerful. That's so powerful. I mean, I talk with leaders all the time who sometimes they don't look at the longer picture.
right.
They just see today, well, right now, you're not performing how I want you to perform. And we didn't look at the layers that's going on in that person's life, where if we looked at the longer picture, those extra 15 minutes just, created health in the long run. It's so interesting for me sometimes because, 26 years I spent serving, working vocationally for local churches. That's
Mhm.
where the majority, before I worked for churches was my teenage and early 20s, and that was, restaurants and construction. But most of my adult life I spent, working for smaller and then very large churches. And so most of, my passion to help bring healthy culture into workplaces has become because I spent time in specifically two larger church organizations where the culture was just not healthy.
Mm.
And, it's sometimes so hard to rectify because I'm like, but it didn't need to be this way.
Right. Yeah, and that's sad, but also, grateful that you have taken a bad experience and you are doing something with it that could bring good, not just for you, but for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's finish with this then. Okay, so
Okay.
let's finish with if we're the person. We're the person who's okay, we're the coworker or the neighbor or the family member. Maybe let's keep it to the coworker because, as I said, neighbor and then family, I was realizing there's more dynamics to play for each of those different,
Right.
each of those different people. But if we're the coworker and we know, okay, we're in this silent season, we've got grief or something going on that's, just causing us to, either tense up or quiet up or those kind of things, and we recognize that, how can we then communicate that to either our coworkers or, our boss or, you know, to just to be able to kind of get that conversation going?
I mean, I think being honest with that vulnerability. I mean, obviously that has to happen in a safe environment. So I'm assuming that you're in a safe culture. And if you are in a safe culture, knowing that you as a coworker can say, "Hey, I am struggling," and let people in
Yeah.
because that voice inside you says like nobody's going to understand, nobody cares, you're being ridiculous, but that voice is lying to you.
Right.
Because there's somebody in your community that cares and they need to know that you need support. And so, I would say be vulnerable with that. Find maybe the person that you feel safest with to communicate that with, and then allow them to encourage you to make the next step if that next step needs to be made. Right? If you struggle
Wow.
with going to your leader, then
Wow.
maybe it's good to share it with someone who's safe, and then they can give you the courage to go to your leader.
Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. Woo. That is insanely powerful. This will be an episode that I listen to multiple times just because I'm looking over my notes thinking, okay, wow, you gave us just some different layers of brilliance here. So I can't thank you enough for just sharing some incredibly helpful and practical wisdom with us. Before we fully move on, want to pick your brain here for a second. A couple of rapid fire questions. We're building
Okay.
this database for leaders to just be inspired, get new
Hmm.
ideas. And so, for you, is there a speaker that you listen to that every time you hear the speaker, you just, for whatever reason, they click off all the boxes and you can't wait to tell somebody else about the talk you heard from them? Anybody fall in that category for you?
Jackie Hill Perry.
Mm,
I love her. Her heart, her vision, her compassion, her intellect, her creativity. Like every single time she speaks, and we're in Monroe, and so Duck Dynasty, and they would just had the LO conference, and I was on the prayer team, and just being able to hear her in person, and just her passion for people and for the Word of God, like I always leave from listening, or whether it's her podcast or whether it's a video, it just ignites something in me. And I think that any good speaker is someone who can spark courage in someone else. So, yeah,
wow.
Jackie Hill Perry.
Wow. That is, any good speaker can spark courage. Wow. Wow. That is incredibly powerful. If you're a podcast listener, is there a podcast that you just, whether guilty pleasure, gardening or true crime, or a development podcast that you just keep going back to and one that you highly recommend?
Well, I'm a counselor, so I really do love Kurt Thompson and Pepper Sweeney's Being Known podcast. It's so great on, they talk about rupture and repair. They talk about the importance of attachment and how it affects us in our everyday lives, and just such good, vulnerable conversations that I really like.
I love it. And then lastly, is there a book that you absolutely recommend? Every leader, if there's no other book you read, you have to read this book.
Boundaries by Townsend and Cloud. I read that book every year.
Wow.
There's always it's always good to be reminded that I'm not responsible for other people, but I am responsible to be a good person.
Wow. Wow. Just incredible. Well, where can our listeners find you or find more information about you online? Where can we point them to?
Sifted Wheat Podcast is my podcast. And so, I talk about all the things that sift us and how to work through that. And obviously, I have a biblical lens for that. So that would be, a niche audience, I assume. But Sifted Wheat is my own podcast. And then I'm on Instagram, Sifted Wheat Podcast. And then on Facebook, Leslie Lamb.
Wonderful. Well, we'll tag all of those and make sure we help promote your podcast because it is absolutely incredible. The conversations, the teaching that you're doing is helping a lot. And so, Leslie, I can't thank you enough. All these years, I mean, even recently, I pulled you in. You're probably like, why am I getting pulled into this? But you graciously listened to some stuff that I was working on and shared your ideas, and just really appreciate who you are and your voice in my life. And I know this is going to help a lot of people on the Speak with People podcast. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing too. And you just keep doing it. People need to learn how to communicate in a way that opens up conversation and stops shutting people down.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Speak with People podcast. It means the world to us when you share this episode. Thanks for liking, subscribing, or following the podcast. That really does help the podcast get into more ears and into more leaders listening. Also, don't forget, we have 2 exciting resources for you. The first is go to Facebook and join the speakers group. This is a community designed for leaders who want to grow their communication skills. Also, go to speakwithpeople.com/skills library to access the Communication Skills Library. It is an online resource chock filled with resources that will inspire you and transform you and grow your communication skills. Thanks again for being a part of the listening community. We cannot wait for the next episode.